Very much, Deputy President. Well, the real problem the Australian people have is that they've had a government for 3 years that is only focused on the narrow vested interests of the people that support the Labor Party, the unions, the big super funds, all the people that man their polling booths, fund their campaigns, are involved in the inner workings of the Labor movement. The government has funnelled cash and policy exclusively to these narrow vested interests for 3 years, which is why they've had no time to solve the grave problems facing the Australian people, which is evident, and that is cost of living issues, housing issues, inflation. The government has been so focused on narrow vested interests that it has had no time to solve the great economic problems of the day. Now, that is a structural problem for this Labor Party because it is literally owned by the union movement. And when the 9 newspapers exposed this massive corruption and wrongdoing last year, they were all so surprised and shocked. It was like a news flash. But everyone knew the dirty little secret. Everyone knew about the corruption, the bikies, malfeasance. It was not news to everyone else. And the people that are paying the CFMEU tax, people of Australia who want to buy their first flat, people who want to drive on a public road, they're paying the 20 or 30% premium that has to be paid to people who don't want to actually work, who want to be paid for doing no work, just because they want to pretend that they are part of a construction project, but what they really are is part of a massive corruption scheme that has been supported by this Labor government for the last 3 years. And that is one of the reasons that housing is out of reach for young Australians, because new apartment buildings are inflated in some parts of Australia by 20 or 25% because of the CFMEU mafia-style racketeering tactics, which is a huge stain on the Labor movement. And I understand that every political party has problems, but this is a structural problem in which it turns a blind eye to corruption. So much so that wrongdoing is pushed under the carpet. In the case of the CFMEU, it is still allowed to own a major superannuation fund. It is allowed to own 21% of the CBUS fund. The Labor Party has a national president who's also the chair of the CBUS fund, which has failed to pay 10,000 death claims for people. When someone dies, they should be able to have their death claim paid if they have paid their insurance premiums. I think that is a reasonable expectation. But CBUS asks people to get 2 death certificates and asks people to deal with 6 to 9 or 12 months of bureaucracy at the worst time in their life, perhaps. Now, can anyone else imagine, seriously, that you could have a person as the head of any other political party and remain as the chair of a major fund like this, a compulsory scheme, nonetheless, then, and be allowed to continue? Now, when Jim Chalmers, the Treasurer, is asked about a scandal at Westpac, he says, well, we should throw the book at these people. And he's right. Malfeasance is malfeasance. But when it's to do with Wayne Swan, Mr Swan and CBUS, silence, nothing. In fact, he says, we don't comment on cases before the courts. Well, he did when it was Westpac, and he does when it's any other organisation, a supermarket perhaps. So this double standard goes to the heart of this issue, that the Labor Party is a party for vested interests. It is a government for vested interests that has abolished the Building Construction Commission because the CFMEU asked it to, because of services rendered at the last election campaign where they supported the Labor Party, and they've done the same throughout this term of government in relation to these scandals in the super sector, in relation to the CBUS fund. A fair-minded person would find it very hard to believe that a union in administration is allowed to own a compulsory pension fund with billions and billions of dollars. It is unbelievable, but it shows the government for vested interests in action.